Ready? 185-2. 185 countries want the United States to end the embargo against Cuba. Two.
A human trafficking ring which recruits its citizens to fight for Russia in Ukraine. About this network, how many Cubans do they believe have been recruited here?
You know, details are very, very scarce, and even...
Straight to that developing story we're following. An ex-U.S. ambassador just arrested, accused of having spied for Cuba, providing secrets to the island for some 40 years. In our Worldly today, in a rare interview, we're hearing from a CIA agent who was attacked, not with a gun or a poison, not by terrorists or a narco-criminal gang, but with a mysterious invisible weapon. That of excruciating headaches. The attack, apparently used against American diplomats in Cuba as well, starting in late 2016, is thus now called Havana syndrome.
With an incredible case of vertigo. The room was spinning. I wanted to throw up.
Mark Polymeropoulos, a former U.S. intelligence officer at the CIA, was hit in 2017 by an invisible attack in a Moscow hotel.
I'd been in places like, Iraq and Afghanistan. I'd been shot at, but this was by far the most terrifying experience.
Under attack. Yes, Cuba is reeling under brutal economic and commercial warfare orchestrated by the United States of America. A new wave of sanctions have been unleashed, which further tightens the 6-decade-old US blockade against Cuba. Why? Because Cuba has been resisting the American imperialist project since 1959. First, the US-backed dictatorship regime of Fulgencio Batista in 1959, and then again in 1961, when Cuba, under the leadership of Fidel Castro, defeated the Central Intelligence Agency-sponsored invasion at the Bay of Pigs. In April 2019, US President Donald Trump and his hawks, John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, activated Title III of the Helms-Burton Act, basically Stage 3 of the brutal blockade.
For the 30th year in a row, the United Nations General Assembly voted concerning the United States embargo against Cuba. By the way, embargo is the old word. Nowadays, we would call it sanctions regime or sanctions. It's the United States did to Cuba for the last half century what it is now doing to China and Russia and Iran. And for the 30th year in a row, they voted. And typically the vote was just like this year's. Get ready. 185 to 2. 185 countries want the United States to end the embargo against Cuba. 2 countries voted in favor of the embargo. One, which will come as no great surprise, is the United States, which is imposing the embargo. And the other one is Israel. I won't make any comment. None is needed.
Was honoured to host the Summit of Leaders and other high representatives of the G77 in China, which is the most representative, broad and diverse representation that exists in the multilateral arena. During those 2 virtually tireless days, more than 100 representatives from 134 nations making up the group raised their voices to call for changes that can no longer be postponed in the midst of this unjust, irrational and abusive international economic order that year after year has deepened the enormous inequalities between a minority of well-developed nations and a majority that has not managed to get rid of the euphemism of developing nations.
The world over today, hundreds of millions of people are besieged by anxiety about their present and future security, dignity, and prospects of well-being. Many are victims and witnesses of present assaults of many, and many more are afraid of future violations of their most fundamental expectations. In his opening address, our Secretary General provided a graphic snapshot of the condition of the world and humanity, a situation that calls into question the state of multilateralism in terms of its founding aspirations as well as its present agenda. The poverty, fear, suffering, and humanitarian distress haunting the victims of conflict, drought, famine, flooding, wildfires, cyclones, deadly disease outbreaks, and other disasters are the outcomes of sustained violation of the most essential principles and the systemic neglect of humanity's dearest values, which lie at the very foundation of the UN Charter.
All right, we cut out of that to take you to the UN General Assembly. As the debate continues, we are expecting President Cyril Ramaphosa to begin his address.
President of the Republic of South Africa, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
President of the 78th session of the UN General Assembly, the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Ministers, and ladies and gentlemen. 78 years ago, in the aftermath of the Second World War, the nations of the world made a solemn commitment to save future generations from the horror and the suffering of war. Through the United Nations Charter, these nations accepted a shared mandate to foster peace and promote fundamental human rights. social progress and to ensure that there's a better standard of life for all. And yet, as we gather here, much of humanity is confronted by war and conflict, by want and hunger, by disease and environmental damage and disaster.
Property, mad, mean and savage. Skill from me band with no bedroom knowledge. Steel plate line me back well firm up and solid. Now, fail pon the trail, me know me can manage. Berlin, Irish, Marshall, seed in the office. Top tier thing after a stand and baggage. Straight like a run up man and rabbit. Oi, the request the best so them a get the more. Now settle for the less, I and I settle the score. She run a physical and she still waiting for. She said she have a problem and I'm on the cure. Push up, sit ups, jumping jacks on the floor. Cayenne pepper and garlic when the lion just a roar. Tougher than steel from the hardware store.